Hello, it's time for my annual pay cut, and maybe yours too, because we've just had the financial year end here in Britain. A lot of companies do their annual pay round at that time, or at the beginning of the year, or here it can happen a lot in November because there's an annual year end for many companies then too. But yeah, the companies sort of say it's a pay rise. Of course, I'm not criticising employers, this is just the way it works. This is the system. If we want to change it, we need to look at the system. But I'm just thinking about it since it's just happened. It's framed as a pay rise, but it really depends on how you look at it. So most people in Britain are getting, I don't know, 2 or 3% pay rises at the moment, except those who can go on strike and hold companies ransom, and they can get a bit more, 5 to 8%. Some of them want and deserve 15 or more percent. Doctors, for example, who were rightly saying their pay rises haven't kept up with inflation for something like 25 years. But I would say that's true of almost everybody. The railway drivers probably have kept up with inflation, more or less, because they are paid a phenomenal amount for what seems to me to be a simple job. A bit boring, but simple. They're on like 65k plus, which is more than double the national average wage. Because they've stayed in trade unions and they go the heck on strike all the time, right? So hence they have decent wages until they're replaced by self-driving trains, which will certainly happen at some point. So if you're getting like a 2 or 3% pay rise this year, or have done already maybe, you might be aware that this is less than the rate of inflation. I mean, not only is it less than the rate of inflation, it's less than the official rate of inflation. Here we have two measures, the consumer price index and the retail price index, and I forget which is which, but one is slightly more than the other. I think that the CPI is saying inflation is 3.5% at the moment, and the retail price index is saying it's 3.8% at the moment. Obviously, since these are government statistics, they're lies. Or let's say they're counted in special ways. Most people are not getting pay rises that are in excess of that, and very few are getting pay rises in excess of the actual true rate of inflation. But what is the actual true rate of inflation? And how do we know? How do we work it out? I was thinking about that with respect to me, because when I look at the things that I mainly buy, they've gone up by an awful lot more than 3.8%. So like a 2.5%, 3% pay cut or pay rise is really a pay cut compared with the true inflation rate, or even the official one. But if I look at my food purchase, my weekly main shop, grocery shop, over the past 2 years, that has actually doubled. So 100% growth in 2 years, meaning that the food inflation rate for me has been around 50%, half of it a year. Now I know when you do you get compounding effects on that, so it might be 50% one year and 48% the next, because you're getting inflation on top of the inflation. But I'm not going to calculate it that accurately, because we're only dealing with rough numbers here anyway. But my food bill has doubled more or less, plus or minus a bit, over the last 2 years. Energy bills, electricity, gas and so on, that's gone up by about half in 2 years. It used to be £90 a month, it's now 160. It's a big jump. Okay. Rent, that's gone up about 30% in 2 years. The landlord phoned up one day this year in a panic because the interest rate rises. He's realised he wasn't making his mortgage payments. So £400 a month got added to my rent and probably everybody else in the flats. Great, eh? So that's about a third gone up in one ka-chunk. What else do I buy? Computer games. A AAA game used to be 30 quid, £29.95. Now it's 70. I don't buy those. I'm not paying £70 for anything except maybe through gritted teeth civilization, maybe. Or I might delay it for a while until it's on sale, or wait a year or something like that till they bring out a version that's bug fixes. Because the first version is always a bit rubbish. But that's 100% increase, more even. And the quality has gone down of those in the last 2 years as well. AAA games, you're better off buying independent these days. Most of those independent games they're not great, but they're not bad. For the amount of money you're being asked to pay, the AAA games are not very good. I've noticed actually in terms of quality, food as well. Not so much the food in the main shops, but the junk food, the KFC, the McDonald's. My local KFC's food quality is quite noticeably down on what it was a couple of years ago. I don't know if that's the same where you are. Let me know in the comments. Is it just my shop? But the food, I don't know if they're using cheaper oils or not changing it often enough or something, but the quality is way down, and the spicy wings are kind of different. There's something weird about the way they're being cooked now. The stuff on the outside isn't like the stuff on the outside of the chicken, of the straightforward chicken pieces. That's not as nice. The McDonald's flavour's slightly different, especially on, I noticed it on the double sausage and egg McMuffin. But there's something different about the flavour. Maybe some of the spices are missing or something. Or it may just be that since I and just about everybody else has had COVID mildly in my case 2 or 3 times, or something like it, maybe it affected my sense of taste slightly, and I just don't like them as much anymore. Is it the same for you? Do they taste different? Are they slightly different? Mind you, McDonald's, for me, they started going down as soon as they cancelled the big breakfast meal in Britain, because it takes them 20 seconds longer to make on average. You know they're not interested in their customer experience there when they start doing things like that. Yeah. So we're getting a kind of shrinkflation. I mean, a lot of confectionery, a lot of packets of things are made to look bigger, but the content is smaller. This is obvious with chocolate bars and things like that, certain ones. Biscuits seem to have shrunk to about half their volume, and the price has increased. So not only has the price gone up, but the quality and the quantity has gone down. So all of those together on the things I'm mainly spending over 2 years, if I go to the minimum, it's at least 30% inflation over 2 years, so 15% a year, let's say, roughly, to within a few percent. Yet the official rate is 3.5 or so. Nothing like reality. Is it the same for you where you are? Tell me, is it actually the same? Are you getting the same kind of vibes? How do you get an inflation-beating pay rise? I've only found 2 ways myself. One is to change your job every couple of years, and then when they ask you how much you're being paid, you round up a bit. Everybody knows you do this. I'm not sure if it's honest. You don't have to round up a lot. You can round up a bit, right? And they'll give you slightly more as a sweetener, as an offer anyway, so you get a bit of a jump whenever you change jobs. Then your employer then has to go to the trouble of doing the same for somebody else when they could have given you the money in the first place. Somehow the psychology of it doesn't work out. The other way is if your company is reorganizing its pay scales, or if you get a promotion, to a new job that has a different pay scale, so you get transferred onto a different pay scale, which is better. Or if they just want to actually increase incentives and give you like bonuses for staying, like some companies I've been at, they'll give you an extra £500 a year for each year you're working with them. Now, one place I worked out, I got all 4 of those in 1 year, and my pay increased by 1/3, which was fantastic. For once, I could actually pay the bills for a couple of years until the usual inflation and sub-inflation pay increases, pay cuts really, sap it away over time. There's another way to work out your inflation rate, which is how much you're spending overall, obviously. So, like 2 years ago, I know that I was spending about £2,100 a month, including rent and food and all that, travel and so on. And now it's 2,700. I'm not doing anything different. That is a 28.5% increase over 2 years, meaning an inflation rate of 14.25%. So yeah, about 15% inflation, whichever way I calculate it. Is it the same for you? If you're in other parts of Britain, is it the same there? I'm sure it is. But what's causing it? Inflation is almost always caused primarily by the government. They increase the amount of currency in the system, and you get inflation. Prices rise to meet the amount of currency that's available. It's the way the economy works. I don't know if anybody really understands exactly why. Economics, there's all sorts of theories about how it works and how governments make their money and how inflation works and so on. And they contradict each other. So I think nobody really knows how it works, but we know from experience this is what happens. And in this case, it happens because of that disease that happened a couple of years ago, the war in Ukraine. In Britain it's also happening because of Brexit. That's probably affecting Europe slightly as well. But it's definitely affecting prices here, and a lot of items are missing from the shops and the pharmacies and places like that because of Brexit. You can't get them anymore. Or the customs are not letting you through, or can't check them before they go off, stuff like that. And also government corruption, for which the local government elections will be payback time for the Tories. I'm expecting the vote isn't out yet, but we know that they've lost about half of the seats that they are competing in, which is massive. I mean, Labour is going to gain at their expense, but I can't vote for them either because they messed up the economy back in 2008. Sure, it was a worldwide phenomenon, but they made the same mistakes and they should have known better, since they made the same mistakes as have been made historically before as well. Anyway, I've talked about that before. So yeah, all I can do is protest vote. It amazes me how many people will continue to vote for these big parties no matter how bad they are or how much they lie. I think maybe 60 or 70% of the population, let's say 80%, Pareto's rule, the 80-20 rule would. Probably, at a first guess, 80% of the population just believe whatever the government tells them, and the same if they favour the other party. It's amazing but true, I think. The corruption, really, in the case of the Tories, was largely giving contracts to their friends for various things, like Matt Hancock gave his friend or his sister, the company his sister had shares in, or some sort of links to, a contract for PPE equipment, personal protective equipment, during that crisis. And so overall, I think that particular one was a few hundred million, but overall there was a lot of wastage in that. 8.7 billion I've seen quoted, and with all the details it goes up to about 15 billion pounds worth of PPE equipment and similar stuff wasted. 4 billion pounds worth of it simply had to be burned to get rid of it because it was not usable, substandard and even dangerous. There were antigen tests which were inaccurate and made at home, would have given wrong results. Millions and millions of pounds worth. All of this money is spent, goes into the economy because it goes into these firms. So it goes into the economy, starts circulating, and you get inflation. The same with the war in Ukraine, supporting that. The government can find any amount of money to support things like that, and they get it essentially, well, they pay it back essentially through inflation. They take it from us. Because the way it kind of works is that they put more money in the system, which they just borrowed, or they could print it, but they borrow it, make a debt out of it. I'm not quite sure why or how that is. I think maybe it helps to limit the inflation a bit, perhaps. I'm not sure. But again, I've seen competing economic theories about that. Who knows, but inflation is robbing you and me because we have to pay more for the same stuff. But the way it helps pay debt for government, or even for you if you have a debt, is that your debt stays the same, but the amount of pounds you have in terms of actual numbers goes up when there's inflation. You may have more trouble buying things because the prices of things go up, but you end up with more pounds circulating, so you can use them to pay off the debt, which has stayed the same, but it does have interest. So you have to make sure your number of pounds is increasing faster than the interest. That's a juggling act, but if it is, you're okay. The debt effectively shrinks. So the government's debt is shrinking in terms of the pounds that they have available, and they're getting them essentially from us, but not through obviously clear tax, but through inflation. It's kind of head scratching. I'd like to see a nice explanation of it somewhere. There probably is a video somewhere of it. If you know of one, let me know. One of their other scandals was of course when they got Dido Harding, former head of TalkTalk, a not very good internet service provider and mobile phone company, to run Serco's track and trace system for that event. But Serco had no experience of that anyway. And it didn't work, and 108 million at least was lost on that. along with a couple of other such systems which they started and failed. There was an NHS system which had to be abandoned after £11 million worth or something. I don't know. He was a bad person to have in that job anyway, Matt Hancock. He was the one who rejected the advice he was given to give an antigen test to everybody going into old people's homes. So people were being moved into old people's homes when they were ill, and he had decided not to test them. So a lot of people in old people's homes died prematurely who need not have. Completely useless people. And of course he was eventually sacked for having an affair in breach of his own COVID rules, getting too much in contact with a certain member of staff, and not for all these billions of pounds wasted. This is because the criminals are in charge, they don't really get prosecuted for crimes. I don't know. What do you think? Am I right? Are there other ways to get a pay increase above the rate of inflation? Let me know. You could study and get a better job. That's kind of like changing your job. Okay. Bye for now.